Divine Truth Spirit Assistance Discussions, giving assistance to people who have lived on earth and who have now passed into the spirit world. The title of this Spirit Assistance discussion is Women Spirits Who Attack Jesus and Mary, during which Mary attempts a spirit conversation where Jesus is able to talk to the evil women spirits who have attached to him since conception and been with him for the past 56 years. But although the spirits are temporarily restricted, they are too unreasonable to have a conversation of any benefit. The session was recorded on the 3rd of April 2018 from 10:30 a.m. in Wilkesdale, Queensland, Australia.
G'day everyone again. It's nice to see you again, even though we only see you through the camera lens at this stage. Mary and I are going to be doing a bit more channeling today, but the first channeling we do is going to need a bit of explanation up front. So what I'd like to do is explain to you what the channeling is going to be, or who the channeling is going to be with, so that you can see, and get some context to it before we begin. And basically, when I was incarnated this time around, so the first time I was conceived in my life, which was 1962, very shortly after, a group of very dark women spirits attached themselves to my physical body while I was in the womb, still in the womb, my mother's womb. And what this meant was, by the time I was born, I was quite sickly, and by the time I was 2 years of age, I had to have an operation on my bowel because a part of it, the doctors thought, had died. And these particular spirits have been quite malevolent in my life. They've been causing a lot of difficulties. They're a large group of women spirits who basically want power over men. And they've caused a lot of difficulties in my personal life. The difficulties include basically encouraging every woman who I've ever met to try and attack me at some point. And also in my relationships, the few relationships that I've had, these spirits have always tried to eventually destroy the relationship in some way, and also influence the women who have been with me to control me and influence me to a large degree. These women have also been systematically, over the past 14 years now, systematically trying to kill me, murder me. And so they've used a lot of techniques to try to do that, which under normal circumstances would probably have worked. And these spirits are used to killing men on earth through using different techniques. And these women spirits have been trying all the different possible techniques that they have at their disposal to try to harm me and my life. So obviously it's good if we can try to talk to these spirits at some point, which we are not sure how it's going to go though, because these spirits have been probably a bit more influential over the last few years in our lives, they've basically upped the ante, trying to influence myself and influence Mary in different ways. And that's caused quite a lot of personal pain for myself. But it's also important to try to speak with them at some point if we can. But these kind of spirits are usually very unreasonable, and usually have, now they are quite murderous, so now they have very high desire to basically just get rid of me rather than attempt to control me, because over the past 14 years their control of me has been reduced every year, and so their overall goal, which is what they were hoping to achieve right at the beginning of my life, has actually not worked out. And this has meant that they've spent close to 56 years with me trying to control me, but over the last 14 years or so now they're just trying to harm me or punish me for their inability to control me. So it's quite an interesting situation with these particular spirits. Now, as a result of that, Mary and I, so here's Mary with me now. How are you, babe?
Yes.
Mary and I have to sort of manage this situation a bit different than how we would normally manage it. So Mary has some ideas about how that's going to be managed, so perhaps we can hear from you.
And perhaps I could give a little bit more context. It's just a few more details to what you mentioned there. And you mentioned the increased influence in the last 4 years.
The increased aggression. Attack and aggression in the last 4 years,
yes,
in particular.
Yeah, because I think
they have less influence, actually.
Yeah, they're having less influence over both of us, hence the
increased attack.
And that is knocking both of us around individually, whereas before we were kind of influenced in our dynamic quite a bit by them, or especially myself. So I would say it's only in recent times that I've begun to be more sensitive to them as separate from myself. And so in order to do this today, it's a bit tricky. I don't, because I can sense them now and their feelings. So over the past weekend, I could feel some of their feelings very strongly, but I don't necessarily feel that they wish to speak.
And these are part of the groups of spirits who surround us at different times. We have a lot of different spirits surrounding us, and as we mentioned a few weeks ago in previous channelings, that some of those spirits are nice and some of them are just observing, and then some of them are like this group of spirits who are trying to malevolently attack us and destroy us. And so those spirits who are trying to destroy something usually don't want to come and talk about it, obviously.
They don't really want to be
Although
known.
these women are pretty angry, so they might come to talk just to express that rage.
Yeah. So I'm not really sure how to do it. I've asked for Rachel, my guide's help. And so we may speak with Rachel to help us understand what's happening with this group, and to maybe try to make contact with the group. And we may talk to Stuart, who we spoke to last week, to just give his sort of clinical observation of what's happening. But I feel the best would be if we could speak with someone from that group of spirits, because and
we have done that before with another group of women spirits. There were a few million of them that we spoke to a few years ago. It wasn't ever recorded, but these were spirits who were trying to destroy me as well, being influenced by this group of spirits. So you know, we had that discussion 4 or 5 years ago with that group, and it was interesting during that period of time, because during that period of time I got very ill. And then as I went through the forgiveness process of those spirits, they eventually left me. I felt them their influence leave me. And then after that, we got to speak to them. And then after that, they actually began to make some progress rather than finished up attacking us. So that alleviated quite a lot of pressure off our life at the time. And this is just another darker group of spirits who are still pushing that kind of pressure on us.
Yeah. And obviously each of us is going through a process of lessening their ability to influence us, but they are still having an impact, obviously.
And hence their increased rage.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just try to...
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk with them directly, and we'll see how that conversation goes.
So I suppose similar to when we spoke with, I think it was with Constance, or was it Amantu who was helping us to establish connection with Constance's group?
Well, that's sort of a bit different, because I asked God to bring Constance's group to us, and then in speaking to Constance, then Amantu could connect to the group. So Amantu knew about the group, but he wasn't connected with the group.
No, sorry, I was just going to make a comparison
Yeah.
to the condition of the spirits.
Yeah.
So this is Rachel helping me understand the condition of the spirits, that a lot of them are in this sort of
Rageful stupor, should we call it?
it's just a compulsive situation where they're not very aware of themselves even. So, you know, that's always a bit more challenging to make contact.
Yeah.
They're less connected to a personal sense of identity. They're just totally enthralled by this point in
By their emotion.
by their compulsive emotion. So perhaps if we could talk to Rachel.
We can pray to break that
Yeah.
compulsion for a period of time at least.
Yeah.
So we just ask God to break that compulsion for a period of time so we can at least discuss matters with them.
Just finding it difficult to willingly.
Because they're in such dark condition.
Okay. What are you doing?
Well, I've just asked God to temporarily restrict your behaviour so I can speak with you.
I don't want to. I hate you.
Well, that's been pretty evident for a long period of time. I don't know whether you know why, really.
I don't want.
Well, I'm going to ask her to continue restricting until you talk about
What do you want? What do you want?
Well, ideally, I'd like you to stop what you're doing for your own sake, as well as mine.
What do you mean?
Well, you're trying to harm me all the time. You're trying to harm people around me all the time, and I'd like you to stop. And every time you harm somebody around me, you actually worsen your own situation. You get more pain and suffering as a result of it. And
I'd stop if you did what you should.
I'm not going to do what you think I should. I'm going to do what I feel God thinks I should. But I'm not going to do what you think I should. Ever. So it seems to be little point.
Then I'm not stopping.
Well, if you don't stop, then you're never going to get what you want.
I don't care. I don't care.
Well, sooner or later, my progression is going to mean that you can't do anything anymore. What are you going to do then?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, sooner or later, I'm going to progress to the point where you can't hurt me anymore.
You're an idiot.
Why am I an idiot?
No, I can't. Oh, that's it. Ah.
Perhaps if we can explain to everyone the difficulties of doing what we're trying to do.
That's very difficult for me to sustain. just a lot of violent intention. Yeah, I just find that difficult to maintain that, because there's some issues with my own mediumship, probably, of just I don't really know how to describe it, you know.
I've asked Scott to keep him in a restricted state for the moment.
It's just so much anger about that. If we could just take a break maybe for 5 minutes, and we'll try again.
Talk with Rachel about the situation rather than having to.
Now it's almost like now everyone wants to have a go.
When you say everyone?
Well, now I feel like the group now wants to have a voice, but
because their behaviour is being restricted.
Yeah, they want to. I just don't know if it's very productive to channel people who are just abusive, you know. I understand it is if we can assist them to make a change, but it's just my personal fear of them that's getting in the way here.
Yeah, my feelings are that they, if they're going to keep getting restricted, every now and then they're going to find it difficult to not have a voice. But as you know, you don't have to do this.
No, I know. I would like to help them, and I think it would be good for everyone.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people who are coming to our groups that are influenced by these women, and there's a lot of women who are listening to Divine Truth who are influenced by these women into quite what I'd classify as violent or abusive behaviour.
Yeah, and what I find is when you, and I've noticed it in myself in the past and in others around us, is that when you point that out, those very spirits become more threatening with the people, and so there's this feeling of that I no longer have, but I have had in the past, of wanting to completely reject and deny the existence of these spirits, which is just a fear-based, a fear avoidance response to what is actually going on. Yeah. We'll have another go. What are you doing to us? How dare you do this to us? Why can't we move? How dare you? How dare you? Why are you doing this? It's just a tirade. I could just go on and on and on, and I won't let them, you know, so I don't know how to do this.
Well, I'll keep restricting them, and hopefully they might listen to something I have to say. Like, the reality is, you can keep yelling and screaming at us if you want, but we're not going to respond much to that. And I'm just going to keep restricting you as long as I'm able to, and as long as it's advisable to, in order to have some kind of a breakthrough with you. Now, how long that goes on is going to be dependent on your willingness to listen. And if you're not willing to listen, then there's little point doing this, but I'm also going to periodically restrict you in the same manner until such a time as you do listen. at the moment you're like spoiled children who just want to have a tantrum, and you have very little idea of why you're doing what you're doing. And what I'd like to do is at least explain to you why you're doing what you're doing, so you have some idea. So we can have a sensible conversation, or you can just stay restricted a bit longer.
What do you mean? Why we're doing what we're doing?
Well, you know, obviously you connected to my body when I was in my mother's womb, and that was nearly 50, well, that's 56 years ago now. Do you realise that you've been doing this for 56 years?
Don't care.
Well, I understand.
Happy doing it.
When you say you're happy doing it, every time, the more you do, the worse you feel. So how can you be happy doing it? If you stop for any length of time, you'll feel how bad your situation is getting. You're in more pain now than you were then.
It's your fault.
No, it's not. It's yours, actually. It's your fault.
Don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care, don't care. Don't care.
Do you want me to restrict your voice as well? Because I can do that if you want.
No, I don't want that.
Well, we can ask God to restrict your voice and force you to listen for a little period of time if you want.
I don't want that.
Well, then how about we have a proper conversation instead of you just repeating words over and over again?
What do you want?
I've already told you what I want.
Again.
Mm-hmm. If I just say, for the sake of our listeners, that a lot of dark spirits inhabit the earth, obviously, and they're earthbound, but most of them are connected to individuals, of course. But when you try to discuss things with them or try to have a sensible conversation with them, they are so embroiled in their own emotional turmoil and satisfying their own emotional addictions that they find it pretty much impossible to even have a decent conversation. And then secondly, most mediums feel the character of these particular individuals, and they're very dark individuals, and so they're very hard to channel for a person who's a bit brighter and who obviously they're hard to channel because they are quite fearsome individuals as well. They are the kinds of people who would be like overt murderers on the earth and those kind of things. So these kind of individuals are difficult to converse with in any sphere, whether they're on the earth still or whether they're in the spirit world. And having a conversation with them can be quite difficult. And so what we're trying to achieve is just to restrict their behaviour for a short period of time, so that they are at least forced to realise that they are people still, and also people with feelings. And a lot of these kind of spirits present themselves as lizards or dragons or, you know, all this kind of, a lot of this symbology that's used in a lot of even movies nowadays are all come from these kind of spirits, where they're presenting themselves not as people anymore, but as, powerful creatures or things like that influence the earth.
Yeah.
But really they're just people, a collective group of people who have a specific condition. And in this case, these women have a specific condition of rage towards men, and in particular, and they want to basically destroy every man, but they want to influence all women to destroy men as well. So,
yeah. From speaking with Rachel over the weekend, this group specifically was attracted to you in order to, their ideal was to raise the perfect man. So initially their feelings weren't murderous, they were just murderous towards your free will, basically. They wanted to have control over you completely. And then
But my fear of them as a child is what caused a lot of my body problems as a child. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, which were potentially life-threatening. Eh?
All of them were life-threatening.
Yeah. But they're willing to be murderous if the child or the man or the growing child is exerting their will in a way that they don't approve of.
Which is what I've been doing since I was born, pretty much.
Yeah. And increasingly so as the years go on. And that's why it's almost like from a person loses their almost intellectual capacity to reason, the more and more they stay entrenched in this emotional compulsion, which is true really for people on earth as well.
Certainly. It's like a drunkard. You can't reason with him to get him off his drink, and it's like a person who's a sexaholic. You can't reason with him in any way to, stop having sex with all these different people.
Or just a person who's addicted to control on earth. If that goes on unchecked for years and years and years,
in the end, that's all they believe.
It's very difficult to reason about what's going on.
And they think that's normal too.
Yeah.
So they think control is normal, or being drunk all the time is normal, or having sex all the time is normal, or having drugs all the time is normal. Whatever the addiction is, whether it's physical or emotional, you end up believing it's normal.
Well, and not even thinking.
Even thinking about it anymore.
It's just automatic behaviour, and I suppose, in spirit form, it's even heightened that emotional dominance. And so, by this stage, this group is very much in this compulsive kind of cycle, there was a lot of shock when they were restricted, a lot of shock of sudden what is going on, this a sudden draw to self-awareness, I suppose, that hadn't been there. But they don't want to talk yet.
No, they don't want to talk yet without abusing us. So, but as I said, from now on, I'm going to periodically ask God to restrict their behaviour until such a time as, we have a breakthrough with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sort of like, a child in a tantrum. The only real way to discipline a child in a tantrum is to hold its arms and hold its legs and keep it completely restricted so that it can't actually do anything to hurt itself or another person. And the child eventually, gets to the stage where the tantrum is exhausted, and then the trigger goes into their grief then, which is a better place. Obviously, they're more reasonable in that place.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it, about earthbound spirits? Because usually when a spirit enters the spirit world, there is more restriction. There's always the interplay between free will, isn't there? But when spirits are earthbound, they're not very restricted.
No, not at all, really.
They've still got possession of free will because no one ever loses it, and then they interact with the will of people on earth. And so in our case, we've been damaged in certain ways in our relationship with women, which then that's our will, our current state then enables them to
have a degree of control.
Yeah.
Although nowadays, as you say, it's not so much control, it's more just a rage and abuse now.
Yeah.
And that's what, it's interesting, we find that even with talking to people on earth, don't we? Like, people on earth often come to us and ask for some truth, you know. Most of the time, of course, they're not willing or ready to hear it. And so they go away enraged, and from that moment on, they start doing things like just attacking us all the time. You know, they can't let it go. They can't let anything go that they've been told. So obviously there's a point of it's hit them in some place.
Yeah.
And then, but now all they want to do is just attack and abuse. And in a lot of ways, these kind of spirits are the same as that too, once they don't get their way. And what we find is most people who come to us and ask us for truth, that really what they're asking is for approval of their facade. They want us to say to them basically that the way they are right now is really good, you know, that, and people are so addicted to their facade that if you break through their facade in any way, all they do is become enraged. And once they're enraged, a lot of times they don't do anything even in a reasoning manner after that. It's like they're just consumed by their rage, unable to feel any grief or other emotion which would allay it. And as a result of that, just go into a never-ending attack. And we've had that happen a lot with the media as well, just a media person who, you know, gets a bit of feedback from us. All of a sudden he'll switch from being a relatively nice person into just a terrible person, really, because his own opinion of himself is being confronted. And then all bets are off. He's willing to lie, cheat, steal, do anything basically to support his to support the fact his opinion that we're bad people. You know.
And when you say feedback, it's not
even
deep,
feedback.
penetrating feedback. It's just there's an issue of ethics here that you're not. You know, we agreed upon an ethical.
Just calling a media person unethical is enough for them to go into one of these rages generally. And it's very similar with other people who come to ask for truth as well. You know, they often have a very strong addiction to their own facade, and so whenever you confront the truth, there's an immediate negative response that turns into a long rage usually. And it's, you know, some of those people have gotten out of that rage. You know, some people we've met like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, are now out of that rage and listening to divine truth again. But for many of them, it took them 5 or 6 years to get out of it. And others are still in it. You know, from the day we met them or had that personal interaction to now, they're still in the same rage. And in that rage, they do terrible amount of destructive things, not only to us, of course, but to people around them as well. And they're destroying their own soul. As well, so their condition is darkening rapidly while they maintain that level of rage.
Anytime we live in rage, no matter what it's about or who it's towards, even towards ourselves, we're degrading ourselves, aren't we? In terms of condition.
So it's a sad dynamic that, you know, many spirits are involved in. As I've said to, well, a lot of our groups, there's around 20 billion spirits who surround the earth at any one time. And a majority of those are earthbound. And so you can imagine the amount of terrible negative influence that spirit-based influence has on what happens on the earth today. So a lot of these cycles of violence that have occurred in the Middle East and other countries, racial prejudicism that results in violence, and a lot of this kind of racial bigotry as well, where you know, ethnic bigotry, I suppose you could call it, where there's a cycle of violence, and you know, cycles of violence towards you know, the gay and lesbian community, and other cycles of violence like this, cycles of violence between different religions, are all caused, usually at their base, are all caused by spirits who are now, people who have now become spirit and still in this enraged state, influencing other people on earth to maintain that state.
Well, it's interesting that you say it's caused by, because there's always that interplay, isn't there, between my will and the will of the spirit.
Of course.
So, and I know this is something that comes up a lot for people when we talk about earthbound spirits and spirit influence, and, you know, how is this just that while I'm on earth, there's these people around me that I can't see that can influence me.
But you get in, like, as you say, we've talked about spirit influence. We did a whole series of quite good talks, I feel, in England when we were there, about kinds of influence people are under. And in every case, there's always something in the person on earth that attracts it and wants that particular influence. Or usually there's some kind of codependency where I'll do something for you that's bad, as long as you do some things for me that are also bad. And that's usually what drives most people into these kind of codependent addictions.
Or false definitions of love.
Of course, belief systems.
Belief systems where we feel like what you're encouraging me to do is the loving and right thing. And also this issue of the...
So a lot of Christians had the view, historically, that it's right to kill Muslims. And a lot of Muslims have had the view, historically, that it's right to kill Christians. Obviously, both things are wrong. But, you know, obviously these particular spirits, after people have passed, after they've passed, they believe it's right. And most of the people they influence on earth believe it's right too. And that's the problem. And
even if they don't, the other thing I was going to mention was the emotional attachment we hold on to in terms of people of our bloodline or our forefathers or our family, or all of that can cause us to even take on beliefs that we haven't really analysed, but we just want the approval, or we just want to feel a part of a clan. And so we don't, you know, it can be so many different things.
That's right.
And with the definitions of love, you know, if you think about like our life in this life now, we've both had injuries that we've had to work through about what it means to be loving and good to a woman. And injuries in that can cause us to accept influence or to agree with influence or to let influence direct our behaviour because we think it's the right thing to. It's very complex, isn't it?
Yeah, like in my case, I've observed 2,000 years of women being harmed. My own soulmate was harmed in the first century. Of course, when I come to Earth again and I'm born through the same process everybody else is, all the emotions of my parents, which includes my mother, who also has been harmed a lot emotionally. She had an abusive father as well. So this all plays a part in my acceptance of, women in fear and rage are sort of understandable, given the fact that there's this long history of abuse. Of course, from God's perspective, whether you're abused or not, the rage is not understandable. You know, God doesn't approve of it. God knows that, and God knows that fear and rage are the primary causes of more violence on the planet. So anytime I'm out of harmony with that underlying belief, I'm now attracting those particular spirits who believe that women should, because they've been abused and harmed, should now be able to abuse and harm others. And that's where I've had to correct a lot of my behaviour. And you can see the results of correcting it even in the groups, like where I'm obviously removing a lot of women who are still engaging that kind of behaviour, which obviously is also distressing to this group of spirits who we're trying to talk to, because they've had control of those women in a lot of cases, causing the attack upon myself or you or on others who are trying to do things God's way. So it's an interesting dynamic, and as you work through the emotion, you lessen the control, obviously, and eventually you get to the stage where the control breaks. But before that time, they go from the bribery phase, where they're bribing you to do what they want, right through to the blackmail phase, and then through into the threatening, and then into actual violence. And most people do that. Most people go from bribery to actual violence in order to get you back where they feel you belong. And you see that playing out on Earth all the time, in relationships and friendships and so-called friendships and relationships, but also in world relationships as well, relationships between nations, where the so-called, the lovely tyrant sort of thing becomes a raging tyrant, because he can no longer maintain control, being the loving tyrant, you know. And And so this is a common form of abuse, and it is caused primarily because of childhood issues where children are given everything they want, or they're giving nothing they want, and they have so much grief about that, and they now want everything that they didn't have.
Yeah.
Either one can cause these kind of terrible emotions. But it seems like they are not going to speak to us, so I think we can give that up as a... We'll try again, probably privately or whatever, over the coming weeks to see how we can go talking to them. Yeah. All right, so we might just leave that discussion there. I'm sorry if it was a bit disappointing for all of you, but that's the way it goes with these kind of things. It's very difficult to break through to spirits who are embroiled completely in their behaviour. So, we weren't sure how it was going to go today, and obviously not very successful. So, aside from the fact that we have maintained a restriction on them for some time, which obviously has caused them to become aware of the fact that they can be restricted, which is actually a good thing. Yeah, it's like a child becoming aware of the fact that it doesn't have unrestricted abuse of the family at its disposal.
Yeah, it's always a good thing.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things to ask is, you just were able to restrict them with God's help, with that group.
Yeah, I didn't restrict them, God did.
Yes.
Just temporarily.
So the question that I need to pose then is, why doesn't God do that all the time?
Well, firstly, I had a loving intent, and my loving intent was that they are temporarily restricted so that I could speak to them and potentially help them. If my intent was to restrict them just to punish them, then God would not have responded to that restriction. And if my intent was to restrict them because I was angry with them, then God wouldn't have responded to that restriction either. So God will only respond to my prayer, which is my desire to help them. And I know that the only way to help them is to have at least a time period where I can temporarily discuss at least something with them, or even talk to them. And so God will naturally respond to that temporary restriction. In terms of why isn't it permanent? Well, firstly, everything is already happening perfectly. So their ability to influence me is based upon emotional problems that I've got to resolve, and I need to resolve them. And in some ways, having them with me reminds me that I'm yet to resolve them. So this is a good thing, actually, to have them with me. It's good for me in the sense because it reminds me that the problem hasn't gone away, so therefore I haven't resolved this problem. And it also, it also doesn't restrict them from fully engaging their desire to destroy themselves. So as we've talked about before in the past, usually a person who's so enraged, like this group of spirits, has to eventually get to the stage where they've engaged so much of their rage that now they have no power to do it anymore. And obviously, if we can stop that process before they get to that point, it's going to be better for them. But many people don't stop, of course. And they have to be let go to that point where they've basically been given so much rope that they've hung themselves. I know it's not a good terminology perhaps, but it sort of illustrates the point where they have to be given, the ability to exercise their free will to the point that their own self-destruction has resulted in the fact that they cannot maintain their energy anymore. So God's not going to permanently restrict their behaviour, and I can't expect God to permanently restrict their behaviour because that would be against the principles of free will. But we can temporarily, as an act of love, restrict their behaviour in order to try to assist them. And that's the reason why I could ask God to temporarily do so, and that God responded to that request.
I often feel, as I do about a lot of things in God's universe, that the spirit influence, it can be such a powerful lesson in the gift of free will. you know, most things that God has designed seem to teach me about free will. But, you know, if I reflect on myself, the acceptance of spirit influence in the past was almost a denial of my capacity to make a different choice.
Yes.
And then once I recognise this isn't my, you know, I'm taking on the desires of other people and using my will to enact them, that's wrong. That's a sin, because I'm not inhabiting my own will and desire. And then beyond that, then there's more lessons about, okay, now that I understand that there's influence and there's me, what do I want to do? And also then if I choose it if I make choices in a loving direction, I get, you know, rewarding compensation. In an unloving direction, I get sort of corrective compensation. But the same thing is occurring for the spirits, that they are being taught, even though it's quite slow because they're not engaging God's way, that the more they engage their will their desires and their free will in an unloving fashion, the more they're restricted, the more the corrective compensation is occurring. And so the whole thing is like a big lesson in free will.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my personal case, these particular spirits obviously have had a long influence in my life. And what happened at a very young age is I became very afraid of them.
Yeah.
And for the first part of my life, up until I was 33 or 34, in fact, I maintained that level of fear of them. Now, because I had a degree of fear of them, that meant that not all the time, but some of the times I did what they wanted.
Yeah.
And that, of course, caused them to not attack me so much because they were getting what they wanted. But the more I exercised my free will and the more I decided to not do things their way, that, you know, that way was wrong. So as I learnt things about the correct way to act with people around me, including the balanced way of acting equally with men and women, once that began to kick in, then their disappointment with me grew, of course, and that turned into rage.
Yeah.
Now, the average spirit would then put a lot of pressure on that individual, and these spirits have put a huge amount of pressure on me to attempt to get me back to that particular way of working, and even to go more than that, to do exactly what they want. Now, if at the moment I had chosen to do exactly what they wanted, I would be in a much better physical condition, probably, in the sense that they would be assisting my physical condition. When I say in a better physical condition, what I mean is I wouldn't be in as much pain. That doesn't mean, though, that my actual physical condition wouldn't worsen, because obviously if I'm engaging sin, my actual physical condition is worsening. But I wouldn't feel the pain of it because my addictions are getting satisfied. The only times you really feel pain and suffering is when your addictions are no longer being satisfied. And you still want those particular addictions met. So this process is, the more pain and suffering I'm in from their attack of me, the better I know I'm getting.
Yeah.
Even though physically it's pretty tiring. You know, at times I have, most of the time I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. From their attack, and the more I have to do, the more they attack me. So I'm more tired. The more, and when I don't have much to do, they leave me alone more. Yeah. But the more I have to do, the more pressure they put on me as well. And it's like basically what they're doing really is they're playing. It's not to them a game. It's a very serious.
Endeavour.
Yeah. But they're basically playing this role of trying to either destroy me or support me, depending on whether I don't do or do what they want, respectively. So if I don't do what they want to destroy me. If I do what they want to support me. And this is, once you recognise that that's what's going on, you can then do a lot about that. So now the more attack I'm under, the more I see it as me progressing, rather than, and I'll get to the point where they can no longer manage the attack. And once I've got to that point, they will disconnect completely. I will be removed of my physical pain that's caused directly by them. And then I'll only be left to my own, the physical pain that I cause myself, So you know, I sort of see this as a growing process, but it requires a lot of faith in God and a lot of faith in God's laws to work through things this way. And I notice what most people do is the opposite to what I do. So they get threatened a little bit, and as soon as they get threatened, bang, they're straight into the addictive support. You know, and in fact, there's many men who are now attacking us who the attack began because we told them that their women were actually treating them abusively.
Yep.
And those men are so addicted to their relationship with their women that once you tell them that their women are treating them abusively, they now attack you. You know,
Yeah.
that's how a normal guy in my situation would act.
Yeah.
So you know, and that's how I see most people on earth act when it comes to this kind of spirit influence interplay with their own emotional injuries.
Yeah.
So it's important to sort of realise that while these spirits are being temporarily restricted, which they still are being temporarily restricted for a little while longer,
Yeah.
and you know, they are going to now be frustrated. And of course, that possibly will increase their anger once they're let go, but it also increases their sensitivity to their own pain and suffering as well. So they will engage their anger perhaps and attack me a bit more tonight and tomorrow.
Yeah.
And but then they'll realise, perhaps because I've stated it, they'll realise that their pain and suffering is getting caused by their attack of me,
Yeah.
and that may cause them to pause and cease the attack.
Yeah. And all that repetition like that they were doing, they're just trying to avoid the sensation of their pain. They're trying to
That's right.
compulsively do something else now.
Yeah, they're like a person going, don't talk to me, don't talk to me, don't talk to me, you know, just in order to, you know, have prevent themselves from having to recognise something.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very childish way of acting, but when we're in our emotions that are driven by mostly childhood addictions, that's what you become like. And there are many spirits in the spirit world and earthbound who have become psychotic as a result of their underlying desire to avoid their emotional condition.
Yeah.
So true psychosis results not from connecting with your emotion, but actually trying to disconnect to the emotion and using every technique possible to disconnect.
Yes. Yes. Trying to get away from yourself so much that you're willing to just engage with even people who aren't in a physical form.
Yes, and not only that, but to go ahead and take actions that you really have no idea why you're doing is that as an act of a person who obviously isn't thinking very clearly.
Yes.
And certainly isn't feeling very clearly either, because if they could truly feel, they would recognise the pain and suffering they're causing themselves and others and stop.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks.